Imagine this. You wake up one morning, your chest heavy, your mind foggy, and yet you check your phone. You scroll through the messages, searching for their name. The person who has hurt you, betrayed you, humiliated you, and still a part of you aches for their presence. You tell yourself it's madness. You know they're poison, and yet the thought of their silence feels more unbearable than the pain they've caused. Why does suffering feel safer than emptiness? Why do we return again and again to the very people who dismantle us? This is the paradox no one wants to admit. The chains that hold us to toxic people aren't forged from iron, they're woven from longing, memory, chemistry, and shadows of ourselves we've never dared to confront. It's not the person we're addicted to, it's the role they play in the secret theater of our psyche. Think about it. You've seen others trapped in the same dance, the friend who keeps forgiving the partner who humiliates them, the sibling who idolizes the parent who never once gave unconditional love, the colleague who craves approval from a boss who only withholds it. On the surface, it looks like weakness, but deep down, it's something far more terrifying. We don't just cling to pain, we crave it. There is a sick symmetry in toxic love. The very thing that destroys you is the same thing you can't let go of. It's as if the wound has learned to worship the knife. And here lies the great question, the one that cuts through psychology and philosophy alike. Do you love them, or are you addicted to the way they break you? Sit with that question. Feel its weight. Because if you're honest, if you peel back every layer of excuse, you'll notice the line between love and addiction is not just blurred, it's invisible. But addiction to people doesn't look like the addictions we talk about openly. It doesn't come with empty bottles scattered on the floor. It doesn't leave track marks on your arm. Instead, it leaves invisible scars on the soul. It rewires the brain to need chaos the way lungs need air. And so when peace arrives, when life is calm, you feel uneasy, like something essential is missing. Strange, isn't it? That peace feels foreign, but drama feels like home. That a raised voice feels like passion, but silence feels like rejection. That the cruelty of a toxic person feels like attention, but indifference feels like death. Why? Why are we wired to mistake destruction for devotion? You've been told love is supposed to heal, but what if love, in its corrupted form, becomes the very thing that enslaves? What if the soul clings not to what nourishes it, but to what mirrors its deepest wounds? The mind is clever at disguising its prisons. It whispers, you stay because you care. You stay because you see the good in them. You stay because leaving would mean giving up on love. But beneath those whispers, a darker truth stirs. You stay because suffering has become familiar, and the familiar, no matter how painful, feels safer than the unknown. This is why people return, again and again, to the fire that burns them. Not because they enjoy pain, but because they've been conditioned to confuse pain with love. They don't chase happiness, they chase intensity. They don't crave peace, they crave the high of being seen, even if it's through cruelty. It's not rational, it's not logical, it's primal. A bond etched into the nervous system like a scar that never fully heals. And here lies the haunting paradox. Toxic people often feel unforgettable, not in spite of the harm they cause, but because of it. Their chaos leaves an imprint, a chemical fingerprint on your brain. They know how to vanish just long enough for you to miss them, and return just soon enough for you to forgive them. They dangle affection like a drug, measured in drops, never floods, and you, starving, keep crawling back for another taste. So the real question is not, why do they treat you this way? The real question is, why does your soul keep asking for more? What is it about the darkness of toxic love that feels so alive, so magnetic, so impossible to release? This question, the secret reason you stay addicted, is not answered on the surface. It cannot be solved by cliches about self-love or just walking away. No. It lives deeper, in the underworld of psychology, philosophy, and human longing. And to uncover it, we must journey there, into the roots of memory, the architecture of the mind, and the illusions that bind us. Because until you see the secret force at work, you'll keep mistaking the chains for comfort and the cage for home. The next step is to descend into those roots, to expose the hidden problem and the ancient psychology that keeps you tethered to what destroys you. At the heart of every toxic bond lies a riddle. Why does the mind cling to what the soul despises? Why does the body ache for the same hands that inflict harm? To answer this, you must journey beyond surface explanations and into the shadowlands of psychology and philosophy, the places where human desire reveals its contradictions. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That line is the blueprint for why toxic people hold such power. What you mistake for destiny, meeting the wrong person at the wrong time, falling for someone who breaks you, is often the unconscious reenacting its old wounds. The toxic person isn't a new chapter, they're the return of a forgotten story. Think back to the earliest moments you learned what love felt like. Was it unconditional? Was it safe? Or did it come with conditions? Attention when you performed, silence when you didn't, affection when you obeyed, withdrawal when you failed. If love was inconsistent, your nervous system learned a twisted equation. Love is never steady. Love is something you earn, chase, or bleed for. This is the hidden problem. By the time you meet the toxic partner, boss, or friend, you're not just engaging with them, you're engaging with the ghost of your past. The abuser's silence feels like your parents' cold shoulder. Their anger echoes a teacher's disapproval. Their charm mirrors the fleeting approval you once craved. And because your brain is addicted to patterns, it clings to the familiar, even if the familiar is killing you. Nietzsche warned of this when he said, "Man is more faithful to the nightmare he knows than the paradise he cannot imagine." The nightmare feels honest because it is remembered. Peace feels alien because you've never truly lived inside it. So you return, not because you're weak, but because your soul is starved for resolution. You're not chasing love. You're chasing the ending you never got. And here's the cruel irony. Toxic people sense this hunger. They are masters of what Schopenhauer called the will to life, the endless striving, the insatiable hunger for meaning and connection. They know how to pull you in by feeding the illusion of resolution. They give you just enough kindness to make you believe the wound is finally closing, then rip it open again to ensure you never leave. Psychologically, this is known as intermittent reinforcement. It's the most powerful form of conditioning ever discovered. It's why gamblers stay glued to slot machines, why addicts relapse after years, and why lovers cling to those who destroy them. When the reward is unpredictable, the brain doesn't just desire it, it becomes obsessed with it. A toxic person's cruelty isn't what binds you, it's the occasional kindness that enslaves you. But philosophy takes this even deeper. Sartre once said that hell is other people, not because they harm us, but because they reflect us. Toxic relationships act as a dark mirror, showing you parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. Your longing for approval, your fear of abandonment, your addiction to intensity. The toxic person doesn't invent these weaknesses, they expose them. And that exposure feels unbearable, yet irresistible. Consider Viktor Frankl's insight. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. But for those addicted to toxicity, that space feels microscopic, almost non-existent. The moment the toxic person withholds affection, insults you, or withdraws, your body reacts before your mind can choose.
The space collapses. You beg, you argue, you return, not out of conscious choice, but unconscious compulsion. And so the hidden problem is revealed. You are not addicted to the person. You are addicted to the pattern. The toxic person is simply the latest actor cast in a role your unconscious has been directing for years. This is why leaving feels impossible. Because walking away doesn't just mean leaving them. It means leaving behind a version of yourself you've carried since childhood. And who would you be without that role? Who are you if not the one who fights for love, who heals the broken, who endures the storm? But here lies the deeper philosophical question. Is it possible you don't fear losing them, but losing the identity you've built in the shadow of their chaos? Addiction to toxic people is not just chemical. It is existential. It is the soul's desperate attempt to make sense of its fractures by replaying them, hoping for a different ending. But the ending never changes because the script was written long before the actor arrived. Until you confront this truth, the cycle repeats. The faces change, but the pattern endures. One heartbreak bleeds into another, each toxic love story a mirror of the last. And still you tell yourself, this time it will be different. But difference never comes, because the hidden problem is not them. It is the unexamined bond between your wounds and your desires. This is the root, the soil from which the addiction grows, and unless it is torn out, the addiction remains eternal. The question now is, what happens when this addiction matures unchecked? What silent consequences emerge when a life is built around craving what destroys it? That is where we go next, into the unseen consequences, the quiet, devastating ways this addiction rewrites not just your relationships, but your very perception of love, freedom, and yourself.
Picture this. Years have passed, yet you are still orbiting the gravity of a toxic bond. Perhaps it is not even the same person anymore. The names have changed, the faces are different, but the pattern feels eerily familiar. You find yourself once again excusing cruelty, once again mistaking absence for mystery, once again feeding on scraps of affection as if they were banquets, and you wonder, how did I end up here again? The answer is not found in one relationship. It is found in the cumulative weight of consequences that toxicity plants deep inside you, like seeds that sprout in silence. The first and most devastating consequence is the erosion of identity. Toxic bonds do not just hurt your feelings, they warp your sense of self. Over time, you begin to see yourself through their eyes. Not enough, too much, unworthy, replaceable. What began as subtle comments or silent treatments becomes the very lens through which you interpret your worth. You wake up one day and realize you are no longer the person you once were. You have been rewritten, line by line, by someone else's script. This erosion has a name in psychology: learned helplessness. When you are punished no matter what choice you make, when kindness is dangled and then withdrawn, the nervous system learns futility. It teaches you that no action will save you, so you stop trying altogether. You remain in the fire not because you enjoy burning, but because you no longer believe escape is possible. But identity erosion is only the beginning. The second consequence is cognitive distortion. Your brain, flooded with intermittent reinforcement, begins to reshape its logic. Cruelty becomes passion. Jealousy becomes proof of love. Silence becomes mystery. You begin to romanticize dysfunction, telling yourself that stability is boring, that peace is lifeless, that love must be stormy to be real. In truth, your brain is merely addicted to the highs and lows, mistaking adrenaline for intimacy. Culturally, this is reinforced everywhere. Songs, films, and novels glorify chaos as romance. You rarely see movies about quiet, stable partnerships, but you see endless tales of fiery love, betrayal, and reconciliation. The culture teaches you to mistake volatility for vitality, and so your personal addiction is mirrored by a societal one. The third consequence is neurological. Each toxic cycle reshapes your brain, tightening the grip of trauma bonds. Dopamine spikes when they text you, cortisol floods when they withdraw, oxytocin glues you to their fleeting affection. Over time, this cocktail creates dependency as real as any narcotic. The cruelest twist? Even when you intellectually know they are harmful, your body craves them the way a starving person craves food. This is why the addiction feels unbreakable. You are not fighting a person, you are fighting your own neurochemistry. But there is an even darker consequence, the collapse of boundaries. Once you normalize toxicity, you begin to doubt your right to say no, to demand better, to walk away. Your boundaries, once clear, blur until they barely exist. You tell yourself, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I'm overreacting. The very instincts designed to protect you become silenced, and you stay longer, tolerate more, sink deeper. Now imagine what this does to the arc of a life. A person trapped in toxic bonds doesn't just lose time, they lose worlds of possibility. The friendships never formed because the toxic person demanded isolation. The opportunities missed because self-doubt kept them small. The years wasted believing that intensity was love, while genuine care was ignored. Nietzsche once warned, "Be careful when you fight monsters, lest you become one." And here lies another silent consequence. You may inherit the very behaviors you once despised. When you live long enough in manipulation, you may find yourself mimicking it. When gaslighting becomes normal, you may unconsciously use it to protect yourself. Toxicity is not just endured, it is contagious. But the deepest consequence of all is spiritual, the distortion of love itself. When love becomes synonymous with pain, you lose the ability to recognize genuine connection. A healthy bond feels suspicious, boring, unreal. You sabotage it, push it away, or abandon it altogether because your nervous system cannot accept what it has never known. Thus, the addiction to toxicity does not just keep you tied to harmful people, it blinds you to healthy ones. This is the silent tragedy. You are not only trapped, you are starved. You think you are choosing love, but in truth, you are choosing the absence of it over and over because you no longer trust what love actually is. And this reshapes society itself. Think of how many families are built on trauma bonds disguised as devotion. Think of how many children grow up watching dysfunction masquerade as love, only to repeat the cycle themselves. Toxicity doesn't just ruin lives, it breeds generations of distortion. So here is the haunting truth. The unseen consequences of addiction to toxic people are not merely personal, they are cultural, generational, existential. What begins as one person's quiet suffering expands into a chain of broken patterns, repeating endlessly until someone dares to break it. And this brings us to the next question. How does one break free? How does a soul, wired for addiction, conditioned for chaos, finally rebel against its own patterns? The answer is not simple, nor is it easy. It requires what philosophers might call a radical inversion, a shift so profound it feels like betrayal of everything you once believed. But it is the only path to freedom. Next, we enter the rebellion, the point where the chain can finally be shattered and the addiction undone. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind you lies the landscape you know: chaos, intensity, longing, pain. Before you lies a vast unknown, quiet, steady, uncharted. You've been told the cliff is too high, that you'll fall, that you won't survive without the fire behind you. But what if the greater danger is not in leaping, but in staying? Breaking free from toxic people is not merely leaving a relationship. It is a rebellion against everything your nervous system has been trained to crave. It is a betrayal of the familiar self, the self addicted to drama, the self that calls chaos home. And rebellion, by nature, feels violent, because it requires killing parts of yourself that you thought were essential. But rebellion is possible. It begins not with rage, not with vengeance, but with clarity. The first act of rebellion is seeing the pattern, not just noticing it in the toxic person, but recognizing how it is lived inside you. Ask yourself, what do I mistake for love? What do I crave in others that I should be giving myself? What pain feels familiar enough that I keep calling it connection? This is uncomfortable work because it means turning the gaze inward. For years, you believed the problem was them. But the deeper truth is that the toxic person only plays a role in your inner theater. Rebellion begins when you stop rewriting the same script, when you dare to close the stage entirely. Carl Jung called this shadow work, the process of confronting the unconscious drives that shape our lives. To break free, you must face your shadow, the part of you that longs for intensity more than peace, for validation more than dignity, for pain more than absence. By bringing it into the light, you rob it of its power. The second act of rebellion is withdrawal. Just as the addict must endure the agony of detox, so too must you endure the emptiness that follows leaving toxicity. At first, silence feels unbearable. The lack of drama feels suffocating. Your body screams for the rush of chaos. This is not weakness, it is biology. Your brain, wired by intermittent reinforcement, is begging for another hit. Here is where most people relapse, not because they love the toxic person, but because they cannot endure the hollow silence of absence. But rebellion means enduring the silence, sitting in it, learning that emptiness is not death, but rebirth. The third act of rebellion is reconstruction. Once the noise fades, you begin to hear yourself again. You reclaim boundaries once shattered. You rediscover passions once buried. You rebuild confidence once eroded. This process is slow, sometimes agonizing, but it is the foundation of freedom. Philosophy reminds us of this necessity. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate, teaches us to embrace even suffering as a step toward strength. Rebellion is not about erasing the past, but transmuting it. The pain that once enslaved you becomes the forge that builds your new identity. The fourth act of rebellion is redefining love itself. You must unlearn the lies. Love is not chaos. Love is not scarcity. Love is not a leash disguised as devotion. Real love is steady, consistent, and profoundly undramatic. And at first, it will feel alien. Too quiet, too simple, too still. But that is because your nervous system is detoxing from addiction. Over time, what once felt foreign becomes the new familiar. This act requires courage, because it means rejecting what the world glorifies. Culture celebrates toxic passion in movies, music, and stories. To embrace healthy love is to rebel against cultural narratives as well as personal wounds. It is a revolution of perception. And perhaps the most radical act of rebellion is solitude. To stand alone, without needing validation, without begging for attention, without seeking chaos, is to prove to yourself that you are whole. Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what has been done to you." Solitude transforms your scars into sovereignty. But let us be clear, rebellion does not come without loss. You will grieve, not just the toxic person, but the version of yourself that depended on them. You will feel loneliness, fear, and doubt. You will question whether peace is worth the price of leaving intensity behind. And in those moments, the temptation to return will be strongest. Yet every time you resist, every time you choose silence over chaos, every time you refuse the crumbs, you carve a new path in your brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, becomes your ally. What once was addiction transforms into new desire. Where once you craved their chaos, you now crave your own calm. This is the alchemy of rebellion. Pain becomes wisdom. Addiction becomes freedom. Chaos becomes clarity. And here lies the paradox.
The rebellion is not really against them. It is against the part of you that believed you needed them to feel alive. Once you dismantle that illusion, their power evaporates. The toxic person loses significance. The pattern loses gravity. You walk away not with bitterness, but with indifference. And indifference, more than anger, is the ultimate victory. And now the question remains. Once you've rebelled, once you've broken free, what is the ultimate truth waiting on the other side? What is the final, most powerful realization about why you were addicted in the first place, and what freedom truly means? That is the last step of this journey.
Imagine standing in front of a mirror after years of captivity, expecting to see the reflection of someone broken, someone diminished. Instead, you see someone unrecognizable, stronger, sharper, freer. And in that moment, a realization strikes like lightning. You were never truly addicted to them. You were addicted to the version of yourself that existed in their presence. That is the ultimate truth. Toxic people do not hold mystical power. They are not sorcerers weaving impossible spells. They only awaken a forgotten hunger inside you, the need to resolve unfinished pain, the desire to re-script old wounds. The addiction was never about them. It was about you, searching for meaning in the shadows of your own fractures. This realization shatters the illusion, because if the addiction lives in you, then so does the cure. Look closer at the paradox. The very people who enslaved you have also offered you the greatest chance at liberation. Their cruelty forced you to confront the hunger you kept denying. Their betrayal revealed the places where you trusted blindly. Their absence exposed the emptiness you tried to fill with intensity. They were not the source of your ruin, they were the mirror reflecting it. And now you must ask, what does it mean to be free if freedom requires dismantling the self you once believed was real? Here, philosophy offers a compass. Viktor Frankl wrote that even in the darkest conditions, man's last freedom is the ability to choose his attitude toward suffering. Your addiction to toxic people was suffering disguised as love, but hidden within it was a choice you never saw: to use the suffering as a doorway to rebirth. When you choose differently, when you refuse the crumbs, when you step into solitude and silence, you realize something profound. You were never chasing them. You were chasing wholeness, and the great mistake was believing someone else could deliver it to you. This is the final realization. Love is not something given, nor something earned. Love is the ground beneath you, the air around you, the essence of your being. The moment you stop demanding it from another's hands, you discover it has been within you all along. The chains break not because you cut them, but because you realize they were smoke. Think of it this way. Toxic love felt intoxicating because it reflected back the parts of you you refused to face, your fears, your insecurities, your longings. You clung to them because they gave you intensity, a kind of aliveness. But here's the truth. Real aliveness is not found in chaos. It is found in presence, in being fully here, with yourself, without begging the world to complete you. And when you arrive at this place, something extraordinary happens. Healthy love no longer feels boring. It feels revolutionary. Peace no longer feels empty. It feels like home. Silence no longer feels like rejection. It feels like power. You realize the true secret. Toxic people were never giving you love. They were only amplifying your wounds until you had no choice but to face them. In that sense, they were strange, unwilling teachers. And once the lesson is learned, the addiction dissolves. You look back not with longing, not with hatred, but with clarity. You see the pattern for what it was, a crucible that forged you. And you vow never to return, not because you are running away, but because you no longer hunger for what they offer. The ultimate truth is this. The addiction to toxic people was always a misunderstanding of love.
You thought love was fire, but it is water. You thought love was scarcity, but it is abundance. You thought love was a battlefield, but it is sanctuary. And once you know this, not just in your mind, but in your bones, you are not the same. The old self, the one that craved chaos, has died. In its place stands someone new, someone whole. This is why the final realization feels both haunting and liberating. No one broke you but yourself, and no one can free you but yourself. It leaves you with a question, perhaps the only question that truly matters. Now that you are no longer addicted to pain, what will you build with your freedom? The answer cannot be given here. It must be lived. So step forward, leave the ruins behind, walk into the quiet, walk into the peace that once terrified you, for that is not emptiness, it is possibility. And in that possibility, you will find the love you were always searching for. Not in them, not in the chaos, but in you.